So 6:30, we will call the meeting to order. Mr. Rusnak, can you do roll call, please?
Rudham.
Here.
Wieskamp.
Here.
Heffley.
Here.
And Norton.
Here.
Thank you. Next is approval of the agenda. Any motions?
So moved.
I second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Third on the agenda is public comment for any topic not on the agenda. Is anyone here to comment on anything not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will close the public comment. Fourth is the appeal of the administrative decision. A request of Christopher and Ashley Dolly of 2292 North Highway 965 to appeal an administrative decision by the code official that canvas structures adjacent to a property line are subject to the fence regulations contained in section 167.04 of the North Liberty Code of Ordinances. Mr. Leens, I believe you have some words that you'd like to talk about before we get into the.
Sure. So thanks, folks. My name is Grant Lintz. I'm the city attorney, but the board here is advised by me. I have not advised city staff in this matter. So my role here is to make sure that we stay generally within the guardrails for acceptable procedure and everyone's due process rights are acknowledged. So I may pipe in from time to time, but generally that's just because we don't do these very often, and it's to make sure we are being respectful of everybody's rights. So the order of business tonight is set forth in the letters A through F here, and so there will be a staff presentation followed by the appellant statement, and then staff statements and rebuttals. The board is encouraged to ask questions after each of those presentations and during the rebuttals. And at some point, you're going to have asked all your questions. Then we'll close that comment period, and then we'll move to deliberations, where the agonizing part happens, where you watch them decide the case right here in front of God and everybody, because that's how we do our open meetings. The actions are taken by a motion. One of the things the board will do is they'll have findings of fact. We're going to try to see if we can agree on what we agree on, and if there are stipulated facts. This is my property. This structure is on my property. This is the thing we're talking about. Those will be appropriate things for the party to discuss in their application, so that we can narrow down what the fighting issues are, if any. The Board of Adjustment exists because of the zoning code, right? And if you're going to have a zoning code, and you're going to tell people how big their houses can be on their lots, and where residential and various districts are, you have to have a board of adjustment. The jurisdiction here is to hear questions of appeals where the decision is in violation of the zoning ordinance. So after we have our findings of fact, we'll have a conclusion of law, and that will say what part of the code, the North Liberty Code of Ordinances, is at issue here, and whether. I believe the question tonight is whether a particular structure is or is not a fence, and I think it's a fence, and I'm citing to this. I think it's not a fence. I cite to that, and there'll be deliberation, and then hopefully consensus. I would encourage the chair to ask everybody who hasn't spoken if they have to make sure, especially folks at home, to have a chance to speak up, so that we make sure that everybody's position's heard. And if you have any questions on the procedure as we go along, ask me. Otherwise, I'm going to sit here and just try to look pretty. Okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And just a reminder, the only question tonight is, did the code official make the correct decision? Anything else is out of our purview for tonight. So we will start with a staff presentation. Mr. Rusnak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this first part, I'm just going to summarize the request and the events leading up to the request. We'll get into staff statements and applicant statements after this, just kind of stating the facts of the case. To my knowledge, I don't know that anyone disagrees with this, but just give you a little bit of background here. So this application appeals the code official's decision that canvas structures adjacent to a property are a fence and are subject to fence regulations. Here's a portion of those aforementioned structures. Here's another shot of them as well. The applicants erected these canvas structures adjacent to the west and north property boundary of 1965 Robin Drive. Portion of the canvas structures adjacent to the west property line is supported by posts, which you can see here, while the portion of the canvas structures adjacent to the north property were supported by 2 trees. And I use the terms was or were. It's my understanding that the canvas structures have been removed, although the post may remain. I'm not quite sure about that. And here's an aerial photograph, which shows kind of the pictures that were taken, shows where those are generally located. Subject property here is the 2292, and then the 1965 Robin Drive is shown, and those arrows show generally where they are located. A summary of the timeline is followed. Summer of 2024, the city became aware of these canvas structures erected at 2292 Highway 965. On October 30th, city staff member Ryan Rusnak, that would be me, sends a letter via regular mail, and that's in the background packet as Exhibit A. We've been corresponding with the property owners and said, you have the right to appeal this decision. That was in the letter that I had written. And so the application to appeal the code official's decision it was submitted on November 25th, 2024, and that's Exhibit B in the background packet. So the property is zoned RS4. That is a single unit residence district. So this just establishes that the property is residentially zoned, and the residential zoning regulations for the fence, accessory buildings and things like that apply for residential properties. There is no definition in the zoning ordinance for a fence. Section 167.01 of the Code of Ordinances reads in part, where terms are not defined, they shall have their ordinary and accepted meanings within the context for which they are used. Webster's Third Dictionary, Webster's Third New International Dictionary of the English Language, unabridged, copyright 1986, shall be considered as providing ordinary and accepted meanings. I've got a copy of it here if we need it, but I've referenced that in the background report as well. Okay, so here is, I scanned this from the actual document that I just showed you. I believe that the number 1 is the most relevant, and that reads a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc., usually made of post, wire, or wood, used to prevent entrance, to combine, or to mark a boundary. Also, I think probably what we'll talk about tonight is section 69.04, subsection 1, which is accessory buildings, accessory structures and uses. I'm sorry. This is still for the fence regulations. I'm sorry. This is 169.041. This is still in the fence code. It says permit required. Each application for a fence permit shall be submitted prior to installation or alteration of a fence or wall. Application shall be accompanied by a plot. I won't go into the whole thing, but just basically to state in 169.04 talks about the requirement for a fence. So you'll see in when I take the position that, hey, if this is a fence, it requires a permit. And these are also 169.04, again, the fence regulations. This is the regulations that talk about what the regulations are for a fence in residential districts. And so on the first line, residential districts, we would consider this to be a side yard or a rear yard. The height limitations are subject to 6 feet. And so if it's a fence, requires a permit, and it's limited to 6 feet in height. Where I started to earlier is 169.05. This is the correct reference for accessory structures and uses. And I think we'll talk a little bit about this, but I won't get too far into this. But just to say that the applicants dispute the city's position that the structures are considered a fence and rather are a shade structure, and therefore the material is permitted pursuant to 169.05. And then you'll see the latter part of that introduction talks about prohibited materials, but there are exceptions for It says plastic for greenhouses and fabric and/or canvases for shade structures. Public input, unclear to me how relevant it is, but we did receive a letter from a realtor representing a property owner at 965 Robin Drive, citing the negative impacts of that canvas structure. That's included in the background packet as Exhibit C.
Mr. Chair, may I interrupt just briefly? Part of the board's job will be to determine what information is relevant to the ultimate question that you're going to be deciding tonight. While you can exclude material, I would encourage you to let everything in, and then when you are ready to make a decision, explain what the materials are that you're basing your decision on, and why they're relevant and why they're based in the code. Okay, so there may be something in the zoning code that talks about this, but if there's not, then you would want to ignore that portion of the feedback. Is that? I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
And so I believe that concludes, so that'll conclude the staff introduction. And again, I think those are just, we haven't gotten any opinions or anything like that. These are just kind of what I think are the facts of the case. And at this point, that concludes that portion.
Thank you. Now's the time for the applicant. You state your name, and yes, thank you for stepping up to the microphone. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. So first, I would like to thank the board for taking time to consider this matter this evening. My name is Ashley Dolly, and I have been a resident of North Liberty for 4 years. I live here with my husband, Chris, who I've been married to for 4 years, and our 4 daughters, ages 2, 4, 14, and 17. I am a professional in nearby Coralville. I oversee responsibility for regulatory quality and scientific oversight at a global corporation locally that's headquartered here. So as a working mom, I know that your time is precious, and I really do appreciate you taking the time this evening away from your families to be here. Next slide. So in the informational packet, staff has provided the 4 findings of fact and recommendations as outlined. We, the Dollies, do not refute that number 1 as the established code. And as to number 2 of the findings of facts, we are in agreement that number 1 of the Webster's Dictionary is an appropriate definition of offense as presented. They do challenge the statement number 3 and in relation number 4 as outlined in the recommendation. While the definition in its entirety is outlined, staff's positions and statements do not appear to consider the definition in its entirety where exclusivity is applicable. In order to meet the accepted definition of offense, there are 3 criteria which must be considered. Is it a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc.? This criteria in consideration of enclosing or bordering would be exclusive, though non-exclusive in what exactly it borders. Is it made of materials? The definition utilizes the term usually, made of posts and wire or wood, and we're in agreement with staff that the criteria is not exclusive, meaning that other materials could be defined or considered a fence provided the exclusive criteria is met. And number 3, is it a barrier used to prevent entrance to, confine, or mark a boundary? This use criteria is considered exclusive. So the question today is, are the structures on our property a barrier, which encloses or borders a field or yard or something similar, made of materials and used to prevent entrance to, confine, or mark a boundary? Next slide. And using the same aerial photo that was provided by staff in the memorandum dated January 10th in preparation of this meeting, I can confirm that there are definitely structures on the property which meet the definition of a fence, but they are not the ones indicated as canvas structure in the visual. The fences that are outlined in yellow were erected by adjacent landowners along the property lines and were present at the time of property purchase. All yellow indicated fences meet the definition of a fence, as they are a barrier bordering a yard made of materials which are used to mark the property boundary as well as confine the backyards of the adjacent property owners. The fence highlighted in blue was an expansion of our fence that was made larger after we purchased it and is legally permitted. And it enclosed a larger area of our yard for our family's enjoyment, creating a confined area for our dog and children to play. It is a barrier enclosing our yard, made of materials and used to confine, again, meeting the definition of a fence. The fence in pink is the fence in question, or was erected in 2024 and extended along the property boundary line just as the fence is outlined in yellow adjacent. It was paid for and installed entirely by my husband and I. And the location of the where it's stating the canvas structures are located is correct. So next slide. So photo number 1 is a visual of the general area for which the matter that we are speaking about tonight is. Photo number 2 is taken from a closer perspective and shows that the shade is elevated approximately 5 feet from the ground. Photo 3 is taken from the perspective as indicated by that green arrow, so it is parallel to the permitted fence, and shows that the shade structure is approximately 2 feet away from the permitted fence to the shade. As you can see from the photo, the structure which meets the definition of a fence is the fence, which was legally permitted and installed per the code and located along the property lines, as it can be reasonably inferred that it is a barrier which borders our yard. It's made of materials, and while it does not prevent entrance or confine, as there is no gate or formal closing, which you'll see in the next photo from the public right-of-way, and is actually fully open to the front yard of the adjacent property, it is used to mark a boundary, our property line. Next slide. So photo 4 acknowledges the staff statement that there is a second shade, which is erected at an angle between 2 trees. It is securely fastened with eye hooks, which are embedded into the trees, and again, with a clearance of 5 feet from the ground. Note that the legally permitted fence shown in the photo meets the acceptable definition, identical to the previous page. The shade structures, however, do not. In considering the criteria, number 1, is it a barrier which encloses or borders a field, yard, or something similar? One could argue that the shade creates a barrier, but it does not enclose or border something. Additionally, one can freely enter our property if they so wished via the public right-of-way. You can walk right under it, around it. You can actually see right through it, all which are indicated in this photo. So if it is not a barrier physically or visually and does not enclose or border something, then the criteria hasn't been met. Number 2, is it made of materials? It's definitely made of materials. I don't dispute that. And number 3, is the shade structure used to prevent entrance to, confine, or mark a boundary? No. From the photo outlined, as well as those on the previous slide, you can see that the legally permitted fence, which has been installed and runs along the property line, is the only structure in this matter that meets the definition of a fence. I do want to note, just so we have it on the record, and you did make a comment about it, where you had made the comment about the canvas portion has been removed, although the posts remain. The photo number 5 is indicating that I confirm that the shade is removed, as such is not necessary in the winter months, but the posts have also been temporarily removed at this time and are present on the ground next to it. Next slide. So these are just side-by-side vantage points from the property and our property. Facing from 1965 Robin, as well as from our side. In review of the public comments submitted, I do have some, I don't know if now's the time or if that's part of the rebuttal, I do have a response to a couple of things in the public comment. No? Okay. So statements submitted in the public comment with regards to the negative impact on property value are not truly rooted in fact. We have had, in fact, 3 properties which are either adjacent to our property or which you must pass our property, and the shade structures are clearly visible, and they have sold since the shade structures have been erected. One of the properties was sold at a price of $507,000, which is 2% below their asking price. The second was $662,000, which was 1.8 below asking price. And the final, which is directly adjacent to our property, sold for $250,000, which was their asking price. These sales prices are significantly exceed North Liberty medium home prices for single-family homes, which as of December 2024 was $300,000. And furthermore, they are in line as well with the sale to list market trends for the area, which trended about 1.9% below what asking is. We also had no idea that there was even a concern regarding the shade structures. And while that particular neighbor has a warning against them that prevents them from directly communicating with us, there's nothing preventing their real estate agent from communicating their concerns. And had they, I were open to that, and I'm confident that we could come to an amicable decision regarding those concerns. Lastly, as staff has stated, they have been aware of the shade structures since the summer, and similar shade structures actually are erected on our property outside of the winter months as well, all in plain view of the public and of identical materials, though only these specific shade structures were identified as non-compliant and, to our knowledge, only deemed a fence after the public comment was received, which stated tarp fence. Next slide, last slide. So in conclusion, we ask that you consider the amended finding of facts and recommendation as presented. The shade structures in question do not meet the definition of offense in its entirety when considering both exclusive and non-exclusive terms. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have questions for the appellant.
So your findings of facts, then the blue in number 2 is?
It is the same definition. What what I'm arguing is that there are exclusive and non-exclusive terms within it, and that we should take that into the entirety, not just. I think that it is a barrier that borders something, my yard, which, that's not taking into account all of the exclusive and non-exclusive criteria of what defines a fence, right?
You have any?
I'm finding that you're approaching this, it's sort of undefined what this is, because it doesn't meet the criteria of a fence, but you've called it a fence and you've called it a structure. What would you define it as?
I have never called it a fence.
In the presentation, you've referred to that as a fence.
So I think, can we go back a couple slides?
Absolutely.
Just to clarify. So what I am calling a fence, one more, is the fence that was legally permitted and built to the code.
Sure.
That is a fence.
Okay,
Just to
what's
clarify the
canvas?
lower one, right? And that's a,
Yes.
What's in low? So
Yep.
what's above 5 feet?
So the canvas, the shade that is between the trees, that is what we're here to discuss.
Yeah, how would you define it? What is it?
A shade.
It's a shade?
Yes. So just
What's
so you
it
guys
shading?
know, so that there is so on our property, we have a number of easements that actually are for stormwater. Okay, so this area gets heavily,
Yeah, it's pretty
you
flat
can't
there
kill
too.
anything around here. Everything just grows and grows and grows. And so this area actually is at high risk, and we have to constantly be cleaning this up. So my husband is retired, but he also cares for our children. And I know that in the photos, it's attached to the bottom because we don't want it attached to the fence all the time, but the bottoms actually detach, and then we can make a canopy, right, for our children to play there while my husband's working in the yard.
and just to clarify, I guess what we just looked at, let's see, which one? I guess the one on the left. So that would be the pink line on the, what would be the north
Yeah,
side?
so that one detaches from the poles, and so that we can hook it to the fence and create a canopy for the children to be out there while he's working.
Yep.
You know how much yard we have, and our kids are pretty little. And so a lot of the trees were also lost in the derecho. There's not a lot of shade cover. So that's kind of, I don't anticipate this to be there forever, just to be clear.
So if I understood correctly, you guys installed the pink fence with
did.
mesh netting on it. I don't know what you'd call that.
Yes.
Green netting. Yeah.
Yes. So that actually, so we actually installed that fence in 2024, and it was actually erected at the request of that homeowner for their desire for a barrier. So my husband and I paid for it all, but it was actually we didn't have a fence there for years.
Yep. Yep. And I know that's a illegally installed fence. Question is why would you install a fence for a neighbor?
That's a great question. There has been a lot of concerning behavior from this particular neighbor. As I stated, there is a warning, like a harassment warning against them. We have endured some interesting and repeated things through like incessant text messages from them, also like false calls for service from the police, all of which were unfounded on every occasion that they came out. We were never asked to address it, but we were hoping that by meeting that request, it would de-escalate some of the behaviors that were going on, because the calls had to do with like our children playing and making noise, like or they had to do with my dog being able to see him and then my dog alerting outside the fence because there was no barrier between his property and mine.
So next question to go with Mr. Wieskamp's question is, what are they shading? I mean, I understand you said that you can move them up so that people can take shade underneath them, but why aren't they always up? Why are they vertical, which would be arguably worse for wind loading and long-term maintainability and structural stability?
I mean, you'd have to ask my husband why he installed them like that. Like I said, when he's out there working on all the vegetation that grows out there, they get hooked to the fence in a vertical position so that he can work.
Since we have the dictionary here, could you look up the definition of shade?
Absolutely.
And so you're thinking it's shade structure. Is that how you're defining that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a structure that creates shade.
Sure. So
Definitely.
I don't know if we'll find that in the dictionary.
I'm sure both words are in there. I don't know if they're together.
Yeah.
Well, we define structure in the zoning ordinance.
Right. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
And
I'm just trying to figure. I'm trying to figure out if it doesn't meet the full criteria of offense, it has to be something. I'm trying to figure out how do we define this thing? So if it's a shade, it has some structure to it.
We actually have very similar ones that are erected by our pool that get put up and down as well. And we've never had any issues with that. They're fully visible. You can see our pool in our backyard is fully visible to the public.
I was going to say it's a deep-bodied herring, but that's a shad. If I may, sorry. There are an intimidating number of definitions for the word shade. I will stop after a few, if that's okay. Would you like me to read, or Mr. Chair or Ms. Dolly, if you want to, however you want to handle these, but I will represent to you that I'm reading from the word shade here on page
Riveted.
1756. Shade, also shaded or shading, the comparative darkness caused by the interception or screening of rays of light from an object, place, or area. That's number one. Number two is a place or an area of comparative darkness, as one is sheltered from the sun. 3, see window shade. As 4, a lampshade. 5, shades, a darkness gathering. So I think we're looking for a noun, right? Something that provides shade. And a shade, a little bit, a touch. No. Okay, here we go. 15 down. Anything used for protection against excessive light, heat, etc. 16. Let's see, in architectural shades and shadows, a shadow upon those parts of a solid that are tangent or turned away. Okay, we're getting into math. I would suggest there's probably not very much math in our code. To cast shade upon, we're not going to do that. I think I would suggest that if we're in the context of a noun, and I think we want to have Mr. Rusnak and Ms. Dolly have a chance to review that definition if we're interested in, but I think 15 is the object to use to provide shade.
Anything used for the protection against excessive light, heat, et cetera. And then also the comparative darkness caused by the interception of screening of rays of light from an object.
That's number one, right?
That's number one, which, as I think about this, the screening of light, anything used for protection against excessive light, I think the two of those mesh pretty well together, that it's.
And Mr. Chair, I would just check, make sure Ms. Norton is able to hear our.
Ms. Norton, are you able to hear our
Oh,
conversation?
yes, I'm following along.
I'll get to your questions in just a second, if that's all right. I won't forget about you.
That's, thank you.
I'm looking on my daughter's Kindle
Okay.
because she has this, but
You're free to look at this. This is an antique, so I'm sure we
I
bought
know,
it
I don't want to break
eBay.
it.
Not that old, it's 86.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous about calling 1986 an antique here.
You're an antique.
It's right. You can take it down.
I would say number 15 is the definition of how this is utilized.
Are you comfortable with that? So I think the board is probably okay accepting definition number 15. It's part of your findings of fact for
Yep.
shade if that enters into it later on.
Okay.
Is it okay if I go up to the picture? Because I just want to make sure I understand
There's a monitor right
everything.
in front of you
Because
that's,
I mean, I have
Oh,
the screen
sure.
right here, but I
Yes,
just want to
you-
make sure everyone else is.
Sure.
So I can just. So your property is in the blue, right?
My property is everything on this.
All of it? Okay. Because that's
Yep.
what I was. I.
Do you have
pink.
that picture, the one,
Oh,
it shows your property
yep,
line?
yep.
So if you go back, so that
There you
that
go.
whole blue area is my property.
Okay.
The area that we're speaking about is where where the three houses are on the side of are at the back of my property. It's the house closest to the pool.
Okay. So yeah. So that. Okay. Anyway. Okay. That's what I was wondering, and so that is why you have that yellow fence erected.
Yeah, so they're so our neighbors, Doug and Doug.
It goes that whole
Yeah.
line down,
Yeah,
right?
so the
Okay.
other two homes, they, the two dogs, as I like to call them, had already had a fence. That's the yellow line. So
Okay.
we just completed the fence on the house property. So the prior owners
Okay.
did not have a fence there because
Right.
we didn't have one. for
Okay.
years
Okay.
before that.
And so, can you go back to the other one that had all the different pictures, the colored lines?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the pink, which is around 1965, is where the shade is?
They're on the back end. So I wish that it was a better picture. That GIS is always,
our satellite is,
I know. Can I come up here?
ask the chair.
Up on the stairs?
Yes, if it would help, Ms. Heffley.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
please do.
sorry. I just need just to see it better in my mind. Okay, because
So
I
this
didn't
area
realize.
is a stormwater easement because we have
Okay.
a huge thing here. So the shade structure actually does not even extend to here. It starts about right here.
Okay.
I'd have to go look, and then it goes to here. There's a tree there. And like I said, it's 2 feet
Okay.
away from it, and 5 feet above the ground. And then we have 2 trees. One of them is dying, but
Okay.
a couple over here, that's the other one.
Okay, and you have those up because when your husband is out with the kids, it provides shade for
Yes.
them.
So they lost all the trees that used to be here. This is
Okay.
semi-recent, I think, right, Ryan?
2023.
Yeah. So this is the most recent. So these trees are just starting to grow, finally. One of them is completely broken off on the other side. So really, even though you can see that it's attached to 2 trees, it's missing the majority of its canopy where we get a lot of the vegetation. because they were lost during the drainage. So these have all been planted to get better.
Okay.
We also have been doing a lot of tributing of trees on our property because I found out you can get free trees by tributing trees and starting to grow them again.
Okay. Okay.
Ms. Norden, I know, I don't think you were able to see all that, but are you comfortable with the properties and what fences are, where the legal fence is and where the fence or shade structure in question is?
Yes, I was looking at the aerial photo and she described it really well about what was where. So I think I understand.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Well, as long as you're on
Not
right
at
now.
this time.
Okay. Ms. Effley, Mr. Wieskamp, any questions right now?
I don't think I have any further questions at this time. I don't know.
Starting to see,
Pondering.
getting my head wrapped around
Yeah.
where things are at, so.
If you have no further comment, we don't have questions right now. We're on to C, the staff and appellee statement. I'm sorry, staff and,
Yeah, you're right.
yeah,
That's us.
staff and appellee statement. Mr. Rusnak, any
Yep.
statement, please?
Thank you very much. Again, we'll look at the definition of fence. Again, just to reiterate, a barrier enclosing or boarding a field, et cetera, usually made of posts, wire, and wood used to, let me get to my notes here. Yep. I also included in the definition of barrier, I don't know that I need to at this point. I don't believe there's any disagreement that this is a barrier. I think unless I heard wrong, that this does act like a barrier, but I did put the definition that's in the dictionary, anything that built to serve bar of passage, such as a railing fence or the like. And again, a split rail fence is something that doesn't prevent somebody from getting to the other side, but it acts like a barrier. But again, doesn't appear that is being contested. Again, I just want to bring up back this definition. Again, it says usually made of posts of wood, wire, or wood. Usually doesn't mean exclusively or always. So the barrier can be made up of materials other than post, wire, or wood. Here's an example of a fence. It's a snow fence. We start to see them come up now. This is a plastic fence. Generally a plastic fence, and normally has posts. I found this is called a sand fence. This is a canvas structure. It's kind of like a snow fence, but we don't have this problem usually. But it's a barrier that prevents, and it's canvas stretched across to prevent sand from blowing. I wish we had that problem at this point in our season. So I think you have in your mind possibly what the traditional fence looks like. And there's all kinds of fences out there. There's plastic fences that look like wood fences. There's just all kinds. There's metal fences. There's like I said, there's split rail fences. There's all kinds. I think it's the key is it's a barrier. And I would note that the structure is placed adjacent to a property line. Not all fences are placed on a property line. That doesn't, normally it's a couple feet off because some people might not know exactly where their property line is. But it's definitely adjacent to their property line, and I don't think that's being contested either. I want to go back to this 69.05 of the Code of Ordinances, and I bolded this section that I'll read. No accessory structure shall be used as a dwelling unit. Accessory structure shall be constructed out of materials intended for long-term exposure to the elements. Prohibited materials include, but are not limited to, cloth, fabric, canvas, plastic sheets, and tarps. Exceptions to the materials prohibition includes plastic for greenhouse fabrics and/or canvas for shade structures. Shipping containers are prohibited as an accessory structure. I wrote that amendment in 2023. I can tell you what was on my mind was something along these lines. You don't see a lot of them here, but they're now you can get them at Harbor Freight. They're pretty easy to get. that is something I think we would agree didn't fit within the context of North Liberty. But this was an example during the code writing process. And again, wasn't too long ago, although remember, I actually, in the original draft, had an outright prohibition against these structures altogether. Somebody pointed out, hey, you might want to consider that sometimes playground structures have little canvas roofs and things like that. And I don't think we want to prohibit that. And I said, you're absolutely right. That's not something we want to prohibit. That's what I understand. It's not that specific in the writing, but that was the reasoning for providing that exception. I remember specifically doing it. I just want to point out, and this is provided by the Dollies in their application. This was an email to Grant. There was some correspondence back and forth. First was email correspondence between me and Ms. Dolly, and the second was to Grant. And I just pointing an arrow to an area that says, and this in the context of this, they have a 6-foot fence. Originally wanted an 8-foot fence. The code, and that was an amendment I had done a couple years previously. I can't remember exactly when, to limit the height limit of fences inside or rear yards to a maximum of 6 feet. And this was a discussion about, hey, am I allowed to add something above that 6 foot that would be a separate structure? And I said, no, I believe that would be part of the fence. I provide a similar definition that I believe that would be a barrier. But just to point out, let's see, I would not plan attaching, but rather just utilize them to allow for additional privacy screen. It doesn't say, hey, we're looking for additional shade over in this area. I mean, in the application, it says we're looking for additional privacy screen. And I point out we could go back to out of all of this property, they only saw fit to provide shade on the portion directly adjacent to 1965 Robin Drive. I suppose you could argue that perhaps this situation exists in various locations. I won't say all of it, but in various locations throughout the property. But just saw fit after talking about that we want a privacy screen. No, okay, we changed our minds. Now we want a shade structure directly adjacent to that same property. So I think it was a way to back into a way of saying, well, I understand the code has a prohibition in 1905 that we can't have these tarp structures or canvas structures. Really, the only thing left out there is in the code that allows it as a shade structure. So I would offer that perhaps that position was backed into. We'll just call it what the code allows for, having this canvas structure. This is a section dealing with prohibited fence materials. And again, the only thing that's pointed out here is that there is no prohibition. There's several things in here like, chicken wire and plywood and things like that aren't listed as what in that definition of fence. But we saw fit to provide in our zoning ordinance what prohibited materials were to be absolutely clear. A canvas is not a prohibited fence material. There's nothing that prohibits them from doing that. They can allow it. That's why the canvas stretched over the chain link fence portion of it is totally permissible. We have no prohibition against that. And that's why that is not an issue. But just to be clear that the code doesn't prevent that. Let's see here. Again, I think it was brought up, but I would call to question the vertical fashion of providing a shade structure. This to me is a visual barrier adjacent to 1965 Robin Drive, and it really, again, I think it speaks volume when there's several acres on this property, but it's only up adjacent to a particular property. A visual barrier is still a barrier, and it's a fence. So I think it's in the staff report. I won't restate it, but we do have 4 findings, which staff recommends that you accept, and staff ultimately recommends that you accept those listed findings and uphold the code official's interpretation. Thank you.
Mr. Rusnak, are those first two, are they identical to those that were proffered by Ms. Dolly?
If I recall correctly, I think there was a change to number 2.
I thought that, okay, I wasn't sure, and I wanted to, before we maybe make. There's not a change to it. It's just,
Okay.
you changed the color of the wording, but not the words themselves, is that correct?
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I heard that Ms. Dolly stipulated to number 1, finding of fact number 1 and finding of fact number 2 that you stipulate that they are correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And just real quick, now if you're going to have questions for Mr. Rusnak, this would be more time for Mr. Rusnak, and then we'll do rebuttals.
Okay. It's like debate class.
Right, so.
You'll have plenty of time. Ms. Heffley, any questions for Mr. Rusnak?
I do, but I want to think some more, so can we go to the next? Or if
Well,
Janet?
we'll go. Mr. Wieskamp, any questions to Mr. Rusnak?
If, regardless if it's a fence or a shade structure, does the city require permitting for their review for any of those?
For a fence, yes, it does. And in the fence ordinance says permits required. For accessory structures and uses, it depends on the size of them. So if they're over 200 square feet, then they require a permit. If they're less than, they don't.
Okay. So if this is a shade structure, I know, so, well, you'll have your time, so I'll ask you.
I don't want to, and I don't want to cut you off, right? But I think your decision tonight, or the question tonight, is fence or not fence,
Yep.
right? The ruling is this is a fence.
Okay.
I don't even want you to go into the therefore portion.
Okay.
The therefore has nothing to do with this board. The determination is this is a fence. There may be requirements that flow from that, but those are outside of the scope of the question that's before this body tonight. Is this a fence? And I think you've got agreement on a certain amount of facts already. And I don't want to step on your rebuttal, Ms. Dolly. I apologize. I'll let you speak.
Oh, no, that's okay. So,
1 second, please. Did you have any more questions, Mr. Wieskamp, for Mr. Rusnak?
No, I'm still struggling with we call it a fence or if this a structure. So
How tall is the shade canvas, or what we're trying to define whether it is a fence or not? Because the fence that we saw that is meets all code and it has the canvas on it, that's 5 feet. So is this
No, it is 6 feet.
It's 6 feet. Okay, so the
legally permitted fence that's installed is 6 feet tall.
Okay, that's what I want. Thank you.
And so then what's the height of like this above? Like, so it's 5 feet to the bottom of this canvas structure, and then what's the total height?
I believe it's 4. I can double check. It's 4 or 5.
So 5 plus the 4 for total height.
But it's not at the top of it, just to be clear, because the fence is 6 feet tall. It's 5 feet off the ground. And so the fence is not actually 6 feet tall because you have to have the poles deep enough in the ground. So it's not actually that, like, you know what I mean?
So the shade structure, based on the drawing on page, or the picture on page 3, perspective looking west from 1965 Robin Drive, it appears that the shade structure is 6 feet, 4, 5, 6 feet higher.
Yeah, it might be 5.
Roughly 10 to 11 feet off the ground is the top of that structure.
Yes, probably, yeah. That sounds correct.
That's your question, Ms. Heffley.
Yes, thank you.
Do you have any further questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Ms. Norden, do you have any questions for Mr. Rusnak?
No.
So rebuttal?
Yep, we will go to rebuttal.
Okay, so we don't disagree that it is a barrier, but it is not a barrier from something physical, right? It's a barrier that can be used for the sun. No one can, you can walk around it, right? You can walk under it. You can see through it. So it's not necessary. It is not a barrier that's preventing entrance to. It's not a barrier that is confining, and it is not a barrier to mark a boundary. So, which is one of the exclusive criteria of meeting a fence. I do want to address Mr. Resnick's email. That it is true that we asked for a fence extension, but I do think that the context is important of the fence extension that we wanted to, and why we asked the question. They actually make chain link fence extensions that extend, and then you can pull them out and also create shade on them. They install them a lot on, and I can pull up a picture, but they install them on at like baseball fields and different things like that. So yes, while it would give me the ability to have more privacy, it also would give the ability to provide shade directly on the fence rather than separate of the fence.
To fill the excruciating pause here.
No, I'm just trying to read the definition, but.
Sure. There are. Did you have any additional?
No, I don't disagree that that of the definition. I just think that it's being interpreted without the exclusivity where the exclusivity exists.
Or you are free to ask questions during the rebuttal period as well.
In your statement, in the appeal claim, definition of fence provided in written correspondence by City of North Liberty has been inconsistent and inaccurate.
Yes, I did state that because if you look at the attachments, and I get it, right? When I was asking about this and the offense extension, right, the definitions that were provided were similar to that actually in the memorandum, right? They were portions of the definition, not what was considered the full definition. And so when you leave out parts, you don't get the correct interpretation, right? It's interpreting for like a logical fallacy, right?
So, just so I'm clear, the definition of fence in the dictionary
was not what was provided to me the two times. Yeah,
correct. But is it has been provided to you now, and this is.
It was provided to me in the packet, but also when I looked it up on my daughter's dictionary.
Okay. So everyone's on the same footing.
Yes, I am in agreement.
What the definition is.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that there's no inconsistency there.
Yeah.
Because that would not be fair.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of stuff to look at, so I'm just going to kind of talk out loud. As we come to findings and a fact and recommendation at some point tonight. We heard that number one, number two were both stipulated to, so those are fine. Those will, I believe, be two of our findings of facts.
And I probably should address that that the remaining portion of our property, that big frontage part towards 965, there are a number of mature trees that provide ample shade. And we also have planted 19 additional large bushes that get quite big. And so that's where there's a little bit of a difference, right? Now in our backyard, again, where we've lost a lot of trees where our pool is, we have other structures like this made, from the shade material and two poles that get utilized during the summer months. So is a tree a barrier? Can I not put up a tree, right?
Where I start, if we look at where I start having issues is shade structure on a vertical post. That's not a shade structure that someone would put up to shade parts of their yard, reasonably parts of their yard, especially when they have a fenced-in area that the
So I did text my husband to ask him why he unhooks it and hooks it, and it was concerns around that it would get damaged.
Okay. So if there's concerns around it getting damaged, that
By leaving it hooked to the fence, which is directly accessible to the neighbor, which is why he unhooks it and hooks it. Because we did have some interesting things happen. So that is why it's like that. The other one is at an angle, if you look. It's not straight across or straight up and down. The one across, though, is the one that he unhooks and hooks.
unhooking it and hooking it to prevent damage directly contradicts the statement that it's moved back and forth to provide shade for the kids when a landowner is working out there.
But that's what I mean. When he's working out there, he hooks it to the fence to create shade, but he's concerned that if he leaves it hooked to the fence when he's not there,
It'll be damaged.
that it would be damaged.
I misunderstood that. I got that now.
And the reason there is not any shade on the other side where those two homes are, so Doug and Doug take care of our property on that side. They come around from the fence and mow our lawn. Actually, our neighbor on the end, we've allowed them to build a garden on our property. They're older and they're retired. And so on that side of our property, they've built a garden, so they maintain that. And then they also mow behind the other house.
May I ask which
Yes, please go ahead.
neighbor or house you're referring to?
Yeah, so like the furthest house away from our property, they have a garden that a good majority of their garden is on our property.
Could you go to the one that has address?
What
on
is
it,
the
please?
address?
You had one that has the address on it. If you go the
45.
other
And we've
way,
also allowed them to install, so they also
Yeah,
have a
right here.
fence there, right? The fence is actually not on their property. We've allowed them to put it around their garden because they're older and they get a lot of our leaves and it's a lot of work for them. So it's the 1945.
Mr. Arden, did you hear that? 1945 is the property where
They have a garden on there.
there's a garden.
Okay, thank you.
And you can see there's two big trees there, and then they maintain all of that stuff too.
If there's no further questions for Ms. Dolly's rebuttal, it would be time to move on to the city rebuttal. if any.
Do you guys have any further questions right now for Ms. Dolly?
I don't, thank you.
Ms. Norden, any questions for Ms. Dolly?
No,
Okay. Mr. Rusnak, rebuttal by staff or?
Just one more time on the definition of fence. A barrier enclosing or bordering a field. I think we both agreed that it's a barrier. I don't believe it encloses, but I think it borders a field. So I believe it's a barrier bordering a field or yard, usually made of post, wire, and wood. I think we agree that fences are not necessarily, it can be made of other materials. And then I think you have to take these three next part, and I think the key word is or. Used to prevent entrance, that's one. To confine, that's two. Or to mark a boundary. So the key word is the or. And it's one of those things. It's open, right? And I think I used the example of a split rail fence. Split rail fence doesn't prevent you from, we could crawl through a split rail fence to get to the other side. But it's adjacent to their property line. It's to mark a boundary. And so I think it's a barrier bordering a yard that's used to mark a boundary. And I think it fits, and again, with those words or, right? It has to be a little bit more inclusive. To me, it fits that definition of fence, and that's where I came up with my interpretation from. That's all I have on the rebuttal. Excellent job, by the way. Thank you.
Just so that we include more than not. Mr. Donnelly, do you have any rebuttal or final comments to that?
I just appreciate your time this evening. I know this isn't the favorite part of the job, so I appreciate you guys taking your time and consideration.
Do you have any final comments?
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Excellent presentation. So thank you, Ashley.
With that,
and-
do we formally close the?
If there's no questions from anybody of the participants, then you would want to.
That would be the
close
next step.
Yeah, you
Okay.
close the public portion of the hearing and move on to deliberation.
Okay, Ms. Heffley, do you have any further questions for the
No, thank you.
appellant or the appellee?
No.
Mr. Wieskamp?
None.
Ms. Norden, do you have any further questions for either party?
No.
Okay. I do not have any further questions, so at this point, we will close the comment section.
Sure, why not?
While you guys begin deliberating, do you mind if I?
Sure.
Yeah.
Would you like a brief recess?
A brief recess would be wonderful.
Mr. Chair, you can authorize a brief recess.
Yep, let's take a brief recess. It is 7:31, come back at 7:40. Is that enough time? 9 minutes?
5 minutes is perfect.
5 minutes? Okay, about 7:36. We're in recess.
The lights should come on auto magically.
Auto magic.
Oh, if they don't.
There they go.
It's only $11
gotta walk far
million
enough.
for the building. All right. Your taxpayer dollars sort of at work.
This is a fancy building.
Oh, you were in the old one.
Way
little
better
better than the
than
old
the.
one.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you were too, Alan. That's right.
Yeah,
You
oh,
all
yeah.
were. That's right.
I did.
Yeah, we all were.
I'd actually done a study for Ryan on the square footage and stuff because they were, if they didn't have all of that rental, and then they eventually took over the whole development thing that they were run out of space and people were scattered all over the city with their various offices. So
What are the red?
I wondered that too.
That's Skynet, and we try not to make it mad. I don't know why we paid for that feature. No idea. I suspect that there's a recording in progress. Is my and maybe two thumps on the door if I'm right for the red lights, but I don't.
I'm gonna see if Google
There.
Lens says anything about it.
I believe that's to indicate that anything you can say can and will be posted on Facebook.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, these appear to be AV systems, so that must be the mute light.
Entirely possible.
Listening devices up there or something.
Can you state again, Grant?
Well,
what-
let's wait until
Once she gets back.
until we get back into
I
session.
just couldn't remember what you said at the very beginning about.
Well, you and me both.
Google
So
Lens.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
It just pulls it right up like
It's
an
been a
example.
day.
Yeah,
Holy
yeah. I just took a
Is-
picture of it.
I
and
just-
And then it finds other.
it finds all
things.
this stuff. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It looks like a Sennheiser Team Connect.
Oh, it's Sennheiser, huh?
Yeah, we probably paid
Oh, yeah,
$12,000 per
sure.
one of them.
Sounds nice.
That's probably not quite as bad as the Army's manual striking device or whatever that they bought in the 80s for $700 per hammer. I can't remember what that was called in the invoice, but it was a manually actuated.
Manual actuated striking device.
It was fancier than that. That's a Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
I'll give it.
Not to bash government employed people, but
Great idea.
they had the cost of a restroom in San Francisco. Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, these are just coasters. They look nice, right? But please don't. Yeah, this is the
Thank
second
you.
meeting in a row we beat the hell out of them with the gavel.
Yeah,
we need
'cause it
to. It looks like you're supposed to
I
hit
take
it.
offense to beat the hell out of.
Right, but well,
Not
not
seen.
you, not you. Yeah, sorry, just before you say we're back on the,
Okay.
You need a wood.
Well,
this is great.
it is 7:35, almost 7:36. Everyone's back in the room. Ms. Norton, are you back with us?
Oh, I've been here. I have a weird
Well,
question.
we are back in session.
Oh, we are? Okay, never mind.
Ms. Norton, Mr. Lentz?
Ms. Heffley, I think you had a question you wanted to ask, but we'll do it in front of God and everybody, just like I said.
Yes, well, I just went back to the first page, and I just was trying to remember what you said our job tonight was, and
Sure.
then it's basically to decide whether we agree or disagree with the appellate's dispute of the city's position of the
Yeah,
structure.
so the code official seated to my right here has made a decision that those canvas structures that have been the subject of our discussion and adjacent to property are a fence. That's it. The rest of the sentence, I'm reading from the request summary on page 2 of the document here, but that's, in my opinion, that is the issue that's here tonight. The structures that have been discussed, do they satisfy the definition of fence? And so a finding of fact that they are or are not that would probably be dispositive of the matter here tonight, and you would have a motion affirming or reversing based on your findings for those. It would be weird to find one way and then vote the other, right? So so is that limited? This is my version of a limited response.
Yeah.
I get paid by the word.
I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions procedurally about what's our next steps are here? Okay. I'll get back to looking pretty.
Ms. Darden, you had a question or comment?
No, not yet.
Okay.
So as you're going through here tonight, you've heard a whole bunch. And so there's when you think you've got something that you've got a handle on it, that's a good thing to start talking about. And then what you're going to want to try to do is reach as much consensus as you can, and then find out if you guys disagree. Maybe you're in complete agreement, or maybe you think, and so out of respect for everyone's time, we'll try to move it along as quickly as you responsibly can.
One thing that I would like to knock off right away is Exhibit C. It's a letter from a real estate agent talking about this structure. In my mind, this has nothing to do with the case. This is someone's opinion and has nothing to do with the case. So I will provide 0 weight to Exhibit C, and it will not exist in my decision. So going through, you guys have thoughts, or otherwise I talk too much when.
No,
Allowed.
I'm in a agreement with that statement. Because we also heard evidence contrary about other properties that have sold in the neighborhood, so.
I believe whether it affects property value or not, the ordinance does not mention that. So to me, that's a irrelevant point in this. But both sides, whether it helps, doesn't touch anything, or hurts. So, what I've heard is I'm sorry, Ms. Heffley, go ahead.
No, I'm just talking, sorry.
So we have the definition, and I'm just looking through finding of fact 2. The relevant definition for a fence is, quote, a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc. And actually, I can read it off of page 6 because that's the exact definition from the dictionary, a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc. So that's one clause. Usually made of posts and wire or wood. Second clause. And then third is used to prevent entrance, to confine, or to mark a boundary. So as I see this, it has to comply with clause 1 and clause 3. Clause 2, because it says usually, is not an absolute requirement. But as I read through this, a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc. This is a barrier. It may not be a barrier to walking into the property, but it's certainly a barrier, a visual barrier, which is still a barrier. Usually made of posts and wire or wood. It's made of posts, but it also says usually, so that to me doesn't have to be proved. And then used to prevent entrance, to confine, or to mark a boundary. It prevents entrance, visual entrance to seeing what's going on either side of it. It runs along a boundary. It's not the exact boundary, but it's certainly a marker. I think it meets clause 1 that it's a barrier and a barrier bordering a field.
Mr. Rutta, might I suggest you seek consensus one item at a time here, so you don't have to do all three at once.
So first thing is I believe it's a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc. Any comments on that first clause?
Sure, I'm having difficulty is that there is already a fence and it is, delineating the property line. So this shade or whether we're calling it a fence is in their property. And so determining whether or not that is considered a barrier to basically other people's view, I guess, right? Is what we're determining?
That's what I stated and believe,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Ms. Doherty?
May I ask?
Yeah.
I was under the impression that the appellant agreed with findings 1 and 2. So do we vote like on fact finding number 1 and then do number 2 and then discuss one by one? Is that the correct procedure or the recommended procedure?
Well, since you said recommended, I'm gonna assume that you're asking me, Ms. Norton.
Kind of.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you very much. My understanding is that there were there is consensus among the parties about certain findings of fact and recommendation, and whether that is your understanding or not, that was just me sitting. So, but I think you could, if you desired, move that the board adopt findings of fact number 1 and 2. And I don't think you'd see anyone bolt out of their chairs. And I would suggest perhaps that if you're looking at the packet, if you have a page number, so you can say, so we're all, just to make sure that we're all reading the same thing and you're all.
I'm on.
But yes, Ms. Norton, I think you can certainly start whittling down the things you agree or disagree on. And I think, so if you're set on the definition of fence, go ahead and close that off. And then you can say, well, within the definition of fence, is it this, or this? And then that every item you decide is one item closer to, agreeing on a firm set of facts.
Then I would like to move that the board accept finding of fact number 1 in accordance with section 167.01, etc.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
So it's been, yeah, okay. It's been moved and seconded to,
Now, when you have a motion to second, you can talk a little bit more
Yeah.
if you want, if, invite discussion with the board, or if we're all if you're all in agreement on how you, or set, not necessarily agreement on whether you want to move forward with that, then you can call for a vote.
any,
As long as it's clear, you can probably do a voice vote for these rather than, but unless are you ready to do a roll call for initial findings? You don't care. You're just happy to be here.
I'm just happy to be here. Tell me what to do.
So in forming a record, the better thing to do, even though it's a little tedious, is do a roll call.
we will do that. So it's been moved and seconded to accept finding of fact and recommendation number 1 on page 7. In accordance with section 167.01 of the North Liberty Code of Ordinances, where terms are not defined, they shall have their ordinary accepted meanings within the context with which they are used. Webster's Third New International Dictionary of the English Language, unabridged, copyright 1986, shall be considered as providing ordinarily accepted meanings. Are there any comments before we move to a roll call vote? Mr. Rusnak, could you please do a roll call vote?
Wieskamp,
Yes.
Heffley,
Yes.
Norton,
Yes.
Rudham.
Yes. So we've accepted number 1 as a fact. Ms. Norton, did you have a motion for the second one you had mentioned earlier?
Sure. I would like to move that the board find in agreement with finding of fact number 2 in accordance with Webster's Third International Dictionary, etc.
A so moved would work here. If you wanted to say something to that, or I'm sorry, a second would be welcome.
I'll second.
There you go.
Second by Mr. Wieskamp. Any comments on number 2? In accordance with Webster's Third New International Dictionary of the English Language, unabridged, copyright 1986, the relevant definition for fence is, quote, a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc., usually made of posts and wire or wood, used to prevent entrance, to confine, or to mark a boundary. So any comments before we do a roll call vote on that?
Do we have to note the slight typo that the word to is missing? Used to prevent entrance?
You may be killing Mr. Rusnak here. I think he's done. We can call that a scrivener's
I'll never
error,
recover
probably.
from this.
But
Do we have to even note it?
do you think that makes a difference?
Can we note that it is a scrivener's error and continue forward?
Well, this is why I went to law school. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I like that one. Okay, so we will treat the missing to as a scrivener's error. Any concerns with that? Does that change anyone's decision?
No.
Okay. Mr. Rusnak, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Heffley,
Yes.
Norton,
Yes.
Rudham,
Yes.
Wieskamp.
Yes.
Okay, so that passes. So now we've accepted number 1 and number 2 as findings of fact. We can either keep going with 3 and 4, or I would like to go to, so we've accepted this definition. I'd like to talk through the 3 clauses of that definition if people are okay with it.
Yes.
Yes.
So a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc. Any comments on whether this thing meets that definition or that clause of the definition?
So that's what I was struggling with, trying to define what this thing is. And then the aha moment came that as a shade structure, that can operate just as it is anywhere on site and perform, as a shade structure and not as a fence. But where it where it's hitting me is this is a barrier, and this gets back to number 2, that it's marking a boundary because it's so close and parallels the existing chain link fence that it is marking a boundary. So that's what, in my mind, tips the scales to make it a fence, which then gets us to it's acting as that barrier where it becomes a border. Regardless if it's enclosing the entire property, it is bordering a piece of the property, and it's creating that definition of a border. So, yeah.
Ms. Heffley, any comments on that first clause?
Not at this time.
Ms. Norden, any comments on that first clause?
No.
So we'll move to the second clause, and I read this as it is not required. It's just an example, usually made of posts and wire or wood. This is definitely made of posts. It doesn't have wire or wood, but it has posts, and it's not a required part of it. I think it meets meets clause 2, but I'm also not convinced that it has to meet that fully. Comments from anyone?
Helpful to note agreement or disagreement.
No, I agree with that.
Ms. Heffley, any comments?
No, not yet. No.
Ms. Norden, any comments on clause 2?
I would
Oh, I thought we were doing
agree with it. I guess when I think about wood, wood is a plant. Canvas comes from a plant. So I don't,
Okay,
yeah, I have no question about it.
thank you. And then the final clause is used to prevent entrance, to confine, or to mark a boundary. Mr. Wieskamp, you had comments on that earlier.
Yeah, so that's where I think in my mind it ceases to be. I mean, I'm sure it still operates as a shade structure, but it's by this definition and in my mind it becomes a boundary because of its proximity to the property line. That it's now operating as a barrier or a boundary, or defining the boundary, I guess.
Ms. Heffley, any comments on that?
So it does mark a boundary, but it's a boundary within their own yard, in their own property. So that's where I am struggling.
Ms. Norden, any comments?
I am trying to understand the distinction between whether something is on a property line or within. Can you explain further what your concern is about the fact that it is constructed on their own property?
Because everyone's saying that it's marking a boundary. Well, it's in their own property. The fence that is legal and is already standing is there. And now they're putting a shade, the canvas, in their property line, and they're connecting it to the fence to provide shade for them, which they detach when they're not using it. But it is a barrier and it is a boundary in their property. So that is where I'm having difficulty in trying to decide whether or not they should be allowed to do that.
So the question is not
Yeah.
whether they should be allowed to do that.
Right.
The
And
question
whether
is whether it's a
considered
fence or not.
fence.
So a thing can
Right.
be two
Yeah.
things, all right? A square is also a rectangle. That is not for me to say. It might very well not be two things. you would need to weigh what you had before you and say, is this shade structure also a fence or not? And if so, why? If not, why? And you get to decide what your reasons are.
Okay.
But yeah, don't be afraid, I think, of anybody of stating what you're leaning, because that will foster discussion. And say, I'm not sure doesn't get us anywhere. Saying, I think this, or I'm confused by this, that will help you guys get home before tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Or do you have comments, or I have a comment?
Ms. Norton's already at home.
Sorry.
I mean, looking at to mark a boundary, in my understanding, most fences are not exactly on a property line. They're slightly off because you don't know where they are. And, had that, the fence that was in yellow previously been 10 feet off of the actual property line, it's still marking a boundary. Or so to me, it doesn't have to be exactly on a property line to border to mark a boundary.
Okay.
Yeah, well.
There is a fence on the exhibit here before you here, the blue area.
Yeah, and the blue areas, well, to me, that would meet a different definition of Clause 3. It would be used to prevent entrance or to confine, as the applicant
But
stated.
for an example of a fence that it's not on a boundary line.
Yes,
I think,
yeah.
right? I believe, and use your recollection over mine, but I believe the appellant suggested that that's a fence.
So I believe that it is marking a boundary. Prevent entrance, it certainly stops vision through it. Is entrance, is that the actual physical entrance, or is it, a broader definition of that? But I do believe that it is marking a boundary. So the way I'm leaning is that this would be considered a fence because it is a barrier enclosing or bordering a field. It's a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, et cetera, used to mark a boundary. Is how I would count this as a fence in this definition. Ms. Norton, any questions? Want to make sure we get to you as well, or comments on that?
Thank you, but no, I have no further questions or comments.
I don't have any more. No more questions.
So the way I'm thinking is that that this structure is a fence, and therefore these canvas structures that are a fence will be subjected to section 167.04 of the North Liberty Code of Ordinances. And I kind of put 3 and 4 together, but looking at findings of facts, we'll refer to this as the canvas structure erected adjacent to the property lines is consistent with the definition of a fence because it acts as a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, et cetera, and marks a boundary. And then furthermore, since it is a fence, it would be subjected to the fence regulations. So that is, those are 2 findings of fact that I would find. Comments on that, and if someone feels appropriate, we can make a motion on that. But I want to hear comments first, if anyone has any. Ms. Norton, any comments on that? Not hearing any from here.
No, hold
No,
on.
but I'm willing to make a motion that we accept the findings of number 3, canvas structures erected, adjacent, et cetera. And I move that we accept that finding.
Can we hold a motion, or do we need to
You need a second.
second
a second.
immediately? Okay.
There you go. Second.
Second,
Now
okay.
you can talk about it.
Now, you had a comment, Mr. Wieskamp?
No, I'm just, in my mind, I'm thinking that, if the shade structure had been somewhere out in the yard somewhere, there could be, my neighbor has a pool and they have shade structures. They're little metal cantilevered things, but they're in the middle of the yard. And I could see this providing shade. Actually, my neighbor on the other side of me has something similar, but it's made out of wood, but it shades the hot tub. It's probably more visual than it is for shade, but I know it does shade it as well. But I would never define that as a fence. But once it gets close to the fence and that edge to someone else's property, I think that is defining, that's what kind of tips it in favor of being a fence, because it is creating that border, I think.
So it's been moved and seconded that we would accept findings of fact and recommendation 3 and 4.
Hold on. Just 3.
Just
3.
Just 3. Okay. So it's been motioned that and seconded that we accept a finding of fact number 3. Canvas structures erected adjacent to property lines is consistent with the definition of a fence because it acts as a barrier enclosing or bordering a field, yard, etc. Any final comments before we vote? No. Mr. Resnick?
Norton.
Yes.
Rudham.
Yes.
Wieskamp.
Yes.
And Heffley.
Yes.
Ms. Norton, do you have I think you mentioned 4 as well. Do you have a motion on 4 or any discussion on 4?
Oh, I've hogged 3 motions already. I'll let someone else move for number 4.
I will motion to accept finding of fact number 4. The canvas structures erected are subject to the fence regulations contained in section 167.04 of the North Liberty Code of Ordinances.
I will second that.
Been moved and seconded. Any comments from the board? Ms. Norton, any comments?
No.
Mr. Resnick, could you take a roll call, please?
Rudham.
Yes.
Wieskamp.
Yes.
Heffley.
Yes.
Norton.
Yes.
So as I see it now, are there any other findings of fact or recommendation that we want to include, or do we want to move on to the final decision?
Yeah,
What
I guess
is
I'm in agreement
the
with.
final decision?
I think that, so we've accepted we have the findings of fact. Next, we would have a motion that the board, the motion in my mind would be we uphold the code official's interpretation that this is a fence.
My suggestion.
We don't really need to, though.
Well, I'm going to suggest that you do. You've made some findings of fact, and
Yep.
these things all are true. But your motion is going to be, if I'm understanding your reading correct, it would be to affirm the code official's
Affirm, not uphold.
determination. You can use that word too, but affirm and reverse are typically the ones that are used in this context. But you could say approve, but I would use affirm if you're going to let the code official's decision stand. If you're going to reverse, you would go the other way.
You went to law school. I went to Law and Order. So
I applied for Hogwarts.
I motion to affirm the code official's interpretation that this is a fence.
I'll second.
So it's been moved and seconded. Any comments? Mr. Rusnick, roll call, please.
Wieskamp.
Yes.
Heffley.
Yes.
Norton.
Yes.
Rudham.
Yes. So that concludes section 4. Thank you to everyone that participated. 5, approval of previous minutes. Any motions?
Look through them, they look like exactly as I remembered that meeting, so I'll move to approve minutes from December.
I second that.
So it's been moved and seconded to approve the previous minutes. We'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Mr. Rusnak, is there any old business?
There is not.
Mr. Rusnak, is there any new business?
There is not. We've talked about some procedural matters that we may bring to the board at a future meeting. Perhaps that'll be next month, but we'll poll to see availability and talk about updating some things, housekeeping, if you will.
Any further business from the board, new business? I will declare this meeting adjourned.
Thank you all.